Not just an ordinary tomb. When you look at the Terracotta Army, what do you see? Most people see thousands of clay soldiers buried beneath the ground. An archaeological miracle, proof of humanity's creative genius. But if you look through the lens of economic history, you see something entirely different, one of the clearest examples in history of how a state learned to make society measurable, taxable, and governable. The statues are only shells. The real miracle is the system behind them, and the real warning is where that system ultimately led. Before empire, there was accounting. To understand China's first empire, you have to go back long before it, to the era when rival states were locked in relentless competition with one another. This was a struggle over land, manpower, grain, and survival. These wars were not polite dynastic disputes, they were brutal, exhausting wars of existence. It was in this environment that the Qin state developed a deadly advantage over its rivals. That advantage was not better weapons or braver generals. What Qin achieved was something far colder and far more modern. It learned to see society as a system. Registering households, rewarding military service, breaking the political independence of aristocratic families. While other states still carried remnants of feudal structures, Qin was transforming into something harsher and more calculated. Laws were strict, punishment severe, and loyalty flowed directly to the state rather than to local noble families. That was the real revolution. Qin did not rise because it was loved. It rose because it was disciplined. And its rulers realized very early on, the moment a state can clearly count people, it can use them far more efficiently. Every tool that makes society measurable also makes society easier to mobilize. This is one of the oldest and least discussed rules of power. Unification is victory, extraction is sustainability. When the king finally conquered the rival states and declared himself the first emperor, he was not inventing a machine from scratch. He inherited a hardened system that had spent generations learning how to convert administration into power. But a massive empire cannot survive on symbolism alone. It must be taxed, standardized, fed, and controlled. This is where modern minds often misunderstand ancient systems of finance. In the ancient world, what sustained a powerful empire was not simply money. Grain fed it, forced labor financed it, and legal obligation maintained it. A strong empire was not merely collecting coins, it was collecting obedience. Re-evaluate the Terracotta Army through this lens. This was not the work of a wealthy society spending its surplus on art. It was the product of a centralized state apparatus that had learned how to transform millions of small obligations into a handful of enormous priorities. Standardization, history's greatest extraction technology. The move that separated the emperor from everyone else can be summarized in one concept: standardization. A common script. Common weights and measures. A common currency. Common transportation standards. At first glance, these may appear to be bureaucratic conveniences designed to create order. But when examined more deeply, something else emerges. Standardization means visibility. And throughout history, whatever a state can clearly see, it can usually tax far more effectively. A shared writing system allowed orders to travel more clearly. Common measurements made taxes easier to calculate. A standardized currency made exchange more predictable. Roads built to standard dimensions made transportation frictionless. Burn this formula into your mind: the fewer local differences remain, the easier it becomes for power to reach your doorstep instead of disappearing along the way. Standardization is usually marketed as convenience. For rulers, its deeper meaning is control. The same system can unify markets and reduce transaction costs. It can also unify burdens and make distribution easier. A state capable of imposing order also becomes capable of imposing exhaustion. Labor: if you cannot refuse, there is no cost. The empire's third and most striking source of financing was direct coercion. Ancient accounts describe hundreds of thousands of laborers working on the mausoleum project for years. The exact numbers may be debated. The scale is not. Only a state with extraordinary reach could feed, supervise, and mobilize such a workforce. A local king may build a magnificent tomb. But a ruler with the financial and labor capacity of a newly unified empire can construct an entire underground world. The Qin state did not have to rely on free wages. It could command corvée labor. It could drive prisoners into state projects. Entire communities could be mobilized for walls, roads, palaces, and tombs. This is one of the most important recurring patterns in economic history. Something that appears unimaginably efficient from above is often built on someone below being stripped of the right to refuse. Perhaps that is why the Terracotta Army still feels strange and unsettling today. Its beauty cannot be separated from the production system behind it. Every figure reflects masterful craftsmanship, coordinated workshops, and a remarkable manufacturing process. But all of this existed within a political order where the state could compel labor and punish resistance. The statues were elegant. The model that financed them was not. A state-managed industrial ecosystem. When you examine the Terracotta Army closely, what you see is not merely artistic production, but the birth of a systematic production ecosystem. The figures were not identical. Bodies could be produced modularly, assembled efficiently, and then completed with individual details. Weapons were manufactured in large quantities with astonishing consistency. Workshops had to coordinate clay, bronze, timber, transportation, firing, assembly, finishing, and placement. This structure proves that the First Empire operated with a logic remarkably similar to a modern factory: centralized coordination, standardized processes, mass production, specialization, and quality control. The same state capable of organizing human labor on this scale was also building roads, directing armies, coordinating supply lines, and channeling artisans into tightly supervised output. This was the birth of imperial-scale organization in East Asia. Knowing how to produce power is not the same as knowing how to survive. And this is where the story turns. The Qin state could coordinate magnificent projects. But it imposed enormous burdens on the people beneath it. Farmers were taxed. Laborers were mobilized. Households were monitored. Entire communities carried the weight of imperial ambition. For the palace, standardization looked like order. For the countryside, it often looked like forced intrusion. One of the most important lessons of economic history lies here: a state can become extremely efficient at extraction without creating resilience. In fact, once extraction surpasses legitimacy, it can begin destroying resilience itself. The Qin state could get things done. It could conquer, codify, build, standardize, and command. But that is not the same as creating a stable, long-term social contract. People obey differently when they feel governed than when they feel harvested. A system that relies too heavily on fear, punishment, and relentless demands may appear magnificent in the short term while becoming fragile in the long term. Earth became clay, clay became history. What happened after the first emperor died is not a footnote, it is the financial and political verdict on the entire model. With a speed rarely seen in history, the empire collapsed. Rebellions spread. The dynasty that had built roads, walls, laws, and one of the largest tomb complexes in human history disappeared shortly after the death of its founder. This is what extreme concentration often creates: systems that are terrifyingly powerful while the center holds, and dangerously unstable once it begins to shake. Modern states no longer force peasants into tomb construction. But there are now more refined ways to transform millions of small obligations into a handful of enormous priorities: taxation, debt, inflation, regulation, standardization, subsidies, and credit allocation. These tools are presented as technical necessities, and sometimes they truly are. But the pattern is ancient. Large systems still depend on visibility, legibility, and compliance. They still rely on the state's ability to make society measurable. Once society becomes measurable, it becomes easier to reorganize it around objectives chosen far above ordinary people. This can finance infrastructure. It can finance defense. It can also finance arrogant overreach and strategic mistakes wrapped in noble language. The next time you look at the Terracotta Army, do not see only beauty. See the traces of asymmetry. One ruler's desire became a continental priority. One palace's vision became a burden distributed across countless lives. And those people were never asked whether they wished to finance eternity. The empire simply possessed the power to make them do it. History does not repeat itself. But if you do not understand it, it collapses onto you.